When my own daughter told me I was overreacting about the bruises on her mother's arms, I did not raise my voice. I listened to her explain, for the 10th time, that the staff at Bayshore Gardens were highly trained professionals, and that I was letting my grief cloud my judgment. I told her she was probably right, and then I drove to an electronics store and bought a digital clock. My daughter, Brenda, believed she had successfully managed a difficult situation with her aging father. She had no idea she had just authorized the covert surveillance operation that would expose the horrifying truth and shatter the comfortable denial she had built around herself. Before I detail the evidence I began to collect, please subscribe to the channel and share in the comments if you have ever had a gut feeling that something was wrong with a loved one's care. My name is George Galloway, and I am 78 years old. For the past year, I have lived in a quiet condo in Clearwater, Florida, a home that feels unnaturally large without my wife, Eleanor. We were married for 55 years. We built a life, a family, and a home together. Then, a severe stroke stole her voice and her movement, leaving the brilliant, vibrant woman I loved trapped inside a body that would no longer obey her. The doctor said she needed round-the-clock professional care, a level of assistance I was not equipped to provide. Our daughter, Brenda, a successful sales executive with a busy life of her own, took charge of the arrangements. She chose Bayshore Gardens Care Facility with the same efficient, decisive energy she applied to her business deals. It was, she assured me, the best in the state. It was a beautiful facility, with manicured lawns, a sun-drenched lobby, and a staff that spoke in warm, reassuring tones. The brochure was filled with smiling residents and promises of compassionate, dignified care. The cost was astronomical, but Brenda insisted it was worth it for peace of mind. My routine became as rigid as the steel beams I used to design in my career as a civil engineer. Every day at 2 o'clock, I would drive to Bayshore Gardens and sit with Eleanor until dinner time. I would read to her from her favorite novels, hold her hand, and tell her about my day. She could not speak, but her eyes were still sharp, still expressive. I could see the frustration, the fear, and sometimes a flicker of the old humor I fell in love with. In those moments, she was still my Eleanor. In the beginning, I believed in the facility's polished image. The director, a charming man named Mr. Davies, always greeted me by name. The nurses smiled and offered me coffee. But an engineer is trained to notice details, to see the stress fractures beneath a smooth surface. My observations started with small things. I would often find Eleanor's water pitcher on the far side of the room, full but completely out of her reach. A few times I arrived to find her call button had fallen on the floor, leaving her with no way to summon help. I would mention these things to the head nurse on her wing, a stern, imposing woman named Nurse Ratcliffe. She would offer a tight, dismissive smile and assure me it was an oversight that would not happen again. It always did. I brought my concerns to Brenda during our weekly phone calls. Her response was always the same. "Dad, you have to understand, they have 24 other residents to look after. They are doing their best. You are there every day. You are going to notice every little thing." She spoke with a tone of weary patience, as if I were a child who needed placating. The first serious alarm bell rang about a month ago. I was helping Eleanor with a sip of water when her sleeve slid up, revealing a dark, thumb-shaped bruise on her inner arm. A cold dread washed over me. When I asked Nurse Ratcliffe about it, she did not even look. "Seniors bruise easily, Mr. Galloway," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It happens during routine transfers." That night, I called Brenda, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. Her reaction was a deeper betrayal than any bruise. "Dad, stop it," she said, her voice sharp. "You cannot just accuse them of things. You are not a doctor. They are the experts. Mr. Davies assured me personally that Mom is getting the absolute best care. You are going to get us kicked out of the best facility in Florida with these accusations." She did not believe me. She did not want to believe me. Believing me would mean confronting a terrible truth and disrupting the neat, convenient solution she had arranged for her mother's care. It was easier for her to believe I was a paranoid old man. That was the moment I understood I was completely alone in this. My wife was a prisoner, and my daughter was siding with the guards. I knew then that arguments and accusations were useless. I needed data. I needed cold, hard, irrefutable proof. I needed to see what happened in that room when I was not there. The digital clock I purchased was a marvel of modern espionage, a small, unassuming device with a high-definition, motion-activated camera hidden behind its dark face. It looked like a standard bedside accessory, the kind of thing that would blend in perfectly among Eleanor's family photos and get-well cards. The next afternoon, during my daily visit, my heart pounded with a nervous rhythm as I prepared to deploy it. I waited for a moment when the hallway was quiet, my hands trembling slightly as I unplugged the old cheap clock provided by the facility and plugged in my own. I angled it carefully on her nightstand, a civil engineer ensuring the lines of sight were perfect. It had a clear, unobstructed view of Eleanor's bed, the doorway, and most of the room. The tiny lens was invisible. To anyone who glanced at it, it was just a clock, quietly displaying the time. Leaving her that evening was one of the hardest things I had ever done. The thought of what that camera might capture, of the truth it might reveal, filled me with a sickening dread. But the alternative, the thought of leaving her unprotected in a place I no longer trusted, was infinitely worse. I was an engineer, and this was my structural stress test of Bayshore Gardens. I was about to discover if the cracks I had seen were merely cosmetic, or if the entire foundation was rotten. I could barely sleep that night, my mind replaying every dismissive comment from Nurse Ratcliffe and every placating excuse from Brenda. The next day, I arrived at 2 o'clock as usual, my stomach in knots. Eleanor seemed more withdrawn than usual, her eyes dull and listless. I went through the motions of our visit, reading to her and holding her hand, but my attention was fixed on the small clock. At 4:30, just before I was about to leave, I performed the second part of my mission. Feigning a need to adjust the time, I picked up the clock, and with my back to the hallway, I deftly swapped the tiny memory card with a fresh one from my pocket. The entire exchange took less than 5 seconds. Back in the safety of my own condo, I slid the memory card into my computer. My hands shook as I clicked on the first video file. The camera had been triggered by motion, so the day was broken into a series of short clips. The first few showed a cheerful aide bringing in Eleanor's lunch, helping her eat with a reasonable amount of care. For a moment, a wave of relief washed over me. Perhaps Brenda was right. Perhaps I was just overreacting. Then I came to the afternoon clips. The timestamp showed it was shortly after I had left the previous day. Nurse Ratcliffe entered the room, not with the professional demeanor she showed me, but with a look of undisguised irritation. Eleanor was making a soft, guttural sound, a noise I knew meant she was in discomfort. Nurse Ratcliffe ignored her completely. She walked over to the 4 stand, made a sharp, aggressive adjustment, and then turned to leave. As she walked past the bed, she saw that Eleanor's blanket had slipped. With a theatrical sigh of annoyance, she grabbed the blanket and threw it back over her with a rough, careless motion that made my wife flinch. She said nothing to her, not a word of comfort or explanation. She treated her not like a patient, but like an inconvenient object. I watched, my blood turning to ice. I kept clicking through the files. I saw an orderly come in late at night, a young man who reeked of cigarette smoke. He was supposed to reposition Eleanor every 2 hours to prevent bed sores. The video showed him scribbling on the chart by the door without ever touching her, falsifying the medical records, and leaving my wife in the same position for over 6 hours. I saw aides talking loudly on their cell phones while they were supposed to be attending to her. I saw her call alert, a soft chime, sound for 10, then 20, then 30 minutes without a single person responding. The most damning clip was from that morning. Nurse Ratcliffe and another aide came in to change her. Their movements were rough and impatient. As they turned her, Eleanor's arm got caught awkwardly. She let out a pained gasp, a sound that was clearly audible on the video. Nurse Ratcliffe, her face a mask of cold indifference, roughly pulled Eleanor's arm free and said, "Oh, stop being such a baby. It is not like you can feel it anyway." The casual cruelty of that statement, the utter dehumanization of the woman I loved, struck me with the force of a physical blow. I had to pause the video, my breath catching in my chest. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face, and I wept. They were not just bruises from routine transfers. This was not just a series of oversights. This was a systemic culture of neglect and emotional abuse, led by the very woman who had condescended to me and assured my daughter of their exemplary care. The polished veneer of Bayshore Gardens had been stripped away, revealing a dark and ugly truth. Brenda was wrong. I was not overreacting. If anything, I had not reacted strongly enough. The engineer in me had the data now, cold, hard, and time-stamped. The husband in me had a fire of righteous fury burning in his soul. This was no longer just about getting better care for Eleanor. This was about justice. The immediate consequence of watching that first memory card was that my grief transformed into a cold, diamond-hard rage. The sorrow for my wife as condition and the frustration with my daughter as denial were burned away, leaving only a singular, focused mission. I was no longer a concerned husband. I was a prosecutor building a case. Every day for the next week, the betrayal deepened with each new piece of footage. I maintained my daily routine, arriving at Bayshore Gardens at 2 o'clock, with a pleasant smile for the staff and a loving demeanor for Eleanor. The deception was a heavy cloak to wear. I had to sit there, making polite conversation with Nurse Ratcliffe about the weather, all the while knowing I had watched her verbally abuse my wife just hours before. Each afternoon, I would swap the memory cards, my movements becoming smooth and practiced. Each evening, I would sit in my dark condo and bear witness to the secret life of Room 2B. The evidence I gathered was not just a repeat of the first day. It was an escalating pattern of neglect and cruelty. I recorded conversations in the hallway where staff members openly mocked residents. I captured footage of an aide dropping Eleanor's medication on the floor, picking it up, and then putting it in her mouth. I saw her left for hours in a soiled bed, her quiet moans of discomfort completely ignored. The camera recorded every sigh of impatience, every rough handling, every moment of callous indifference. The bruises on her arms now had a clear origin story, captured in high definition as aides gripped her too tightly, their movements careless and cruel. The most painful realization was the effect this was having on Eleanor. I began to see it not just on the video, but in her eyes during my visits. The flicker of her old self was gone, replaced by a dull, persistent fear. When a nurse entered the room, she would tense up, her gaze darting around nervously. She was living in a state of constant anxiety, unable to voice her terror, a prisoner not just in her own body, but in a room where her tormentors wore scrubs and smiled at her husband. The full weight of Brenda's betrayal settled in during a phone call that Wednesday. I tried one last time to appeal to her, keeping my voice calm and avoiding accusations. "Brenda, I am telling you, something is wrong," I said. "Your mother is not herself. She seems frightened." Her response was a sigh of pure, unadulterated frustration, the sound of a busy executive dealing with an inconvenient emotional problem. "Dad, we have been over this. You are projecting. You are lonely, and you are focusing all your anxiety on the care home, because it is the only thing that has changed. The director called me himself yesterday just to tell me how well Mom is doing, and how lovely your daily visits are. They think you are a wonderful, devoted husband." The words were a gut punch. The director, Mr. Davies, was actively managing my daughter, feeding her a curated narrative of compassionate care while his staff was neglecting and abusing her mother. Brenda was not just an unwitting bystander. She was a willing participant in the deception, because it was easier than confronting an ugly truth. "He is lying to you, Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "No, Dad," she shot back, her tone final. "You are lying to yourself. Please, for my sake, just try to accept that she is in the best place possible. I cannot handle this drama on top of everything else in my life right now." She had made it about her. Her stress. Her drama. My wife's suffering and my legitimate fears had been reduced to an item on her overflowing agenda, an inconvenience to be managed and dismissed. When I hung up the phone, I felt a profound sense of isolation. I was a 78-year-old man fighting a secret war against a multi-million-dollar corporation, and the only ally I should have had, my own daughter, was working for the other side. That phone call was the final piece of confirmation I needed. My plan could not just be about exposing the staff. It had to be about shattering the comfortable, corporate-approved reality that both the facility and my daughter were living in. They needed to see what I saw. They needed to bear witness. I took the week's worth of memory cards and began the methodical process of editing. I was no longer just collecting data. I was crafting a narrative. I pulled the most damning clips, the most heartless moments, and compiled them into a single devastating video file. I added timestamps and short, factual subtitles. Patient's call alert ignored for 42 minutes. Staff falsifying repositioning chart. Verbal abuse by head nurse Ratcliffe. The final video was 15 minutes long. It was a cold, factual, and utterly horrifying chronicle of the truth. It was my weapon, and I was now ready to choose my battlefield. With the 15-minute video file saved on my laptop, a cold, hard piece of undeniable truth, I made the conscious decision to stop being a victim and become the architect of their downfall. The turning point was not an emotional outburst. It was a quiet, calculated shift in strategy. I was an engineer, and I was about to design a controlled demolition of the lies propping up Bayshore Gardens. My first step was to move the fight onto official ground. I spent an entire morning researching Florida's state regulations for long-term care facilities. I found the website for the state's long-term care ombudsman program, an agency tasked with advocating for residents' rights. I filled out a formal complaint online, detailing every instance of neglect I had personally witnessed, carefully omitting any mention of my video evidence. I needed the official process to begin on its own terms, based on my word. The video was my trump card, and I would not play it until the stakes were at their absolute highest. An ombudsman named Maria Sanchez contacted me the next day. Her voice was calm and professional, but also kind. For the first time, I was speaking to someone who did not treat me like a hysterical old man. She listened patiently as I recounted the story of the bruises, the unanswered call alerts, and the general decline in Eleanor's well-being. "Mr. Galloway," she said when I finished, "these are very serious allegations. I am opening an official investigation." This was a critical first victory. The state was now involved. My next move was to set the stage for the final confrontation. I called the office of Mr. Davies, the director of Bayshore Gardens. I adopted a tone of weary resignation, the voice of a man who was ready to concede. "Mr. Davies," I said, "my daughter Brenda feels I have been unfair to your staff, and perhaps she is right. I would like to request a formal care review meeting. I think it would be helpful for all of us to get on the same page." He agreed immediately, his voice oozing with a false sincerity that turned my stomach. "Of course, George. That is a wonderful idea. Open communication is what we are all about here." We set a date for the following Tuesday. I told him I wanted the head nurse, Ms. Ratcliffe, to be there, he readily agreed. Then I delivered the most important part of my request. "And Mr. Davies," I said, "it is very important to me that my daughter Brenda be there as well. I think she needs to hear your professional assessment directly. It would really set my mind at ease." He promised to coordinate with her. He saw this as an opportunity to manage his problem, to sit the difficult family member down with the supportive one and smooth everything over. He had no idea he was helping me build his own tribunal. Finally, I called Brenda. I told her I had scheduled the meeting and that I was ready to listen to the experts and put my anxieties to rest. Her relief was palpable. "Oh, Dad, thank you," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "I am so glad you are finally willing to trust them. I will be there. I will rearrange my whole schedule." She thought she had finally won, that her difficult, stubborn father had come to his senses. She believed she was attending the meeting to support the care home against my overactive imagination. She had no clue she was about to be a character witness in a trial, where the verdict was already decided. The last part of my plan was a simple piece of reconnaissance. During my visit the day before the meeting, I took a walk to the administrative wing, pretending to be looking for the restroom. I found the conference room where Mr. Davies held his meetings. It was exactly what I expected: a large mahogany table, comfortable chairs, and a big screen television mounted on the wall, complete with an HDMI cable for laptop presentations. I made a mental note of the setup. I was testing their arrogance, their complete confidence in their own narrative. Every cooperative step they took, every reassuring promise they made, was another shovelful of dirt on the grave they were digging for themselves. They believed they were arranging a meeting to placate a grieving husband and his sensible daughter. They had no idea they were walking into a planned ambush where they would be the defendants. I would be the prosecutor, my daughter would be the key witness to her own denial, and the ombudsman would be the judge. The pieces were all in place. The data was collected, the official complaint was filed, and the stage was set. I spent the night before the meeting not in a state of anxiety, but of cold, focused calm. I rehearsed my part. I knew exactly what I would say and when I would say it. I was a civil engineer about to present a structural analysis report. The report just happened to detail the complete and catastrophic failure of a human system. Before we move on to the final act, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel. I was ready to show them the evidence, and their world was about to come crashing down. The execution of my plan began the moment I walked into the Bayshore Gardens conference room. I arrived 10 minutes early, carrying an old leather briefcase that held nothing but my laptop. The room was just as I had seen it, immaculate and professional, the long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. Mr. Davies was already there, a welcoming smile plastered on his face. "George, good to see you," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "Coffee?" I accepted, playing the part of the slightly nervous but cooperative family member. Nurse Ratcliffe arrived a few minutes later, her starched white uniform immaculate, her expression a careful neutral mask. She offered me a curt nod, which I returned with a look of meek deference. My daughter Brenda was the next to arrive, looking every bit the high-powered executive in a sharp business suit. She gave me a quick, supportive hug that felt more like a restraint, a silent plea for me to behave. "Hi, Dad," she whispered. "Just listen to what they have to say, okay?" I simply nodded. She had no idea that her presence was the most crucial element of my entire strategy. The final participant, Ms. Sanchez, the ombudsman, arrived precisely on time. Her presence visibly tightened the atmosphere. Mr. Davies's smile became a little more strained. He had not expected an unannounced state official. "Ms. Sanchez," he said, recovering quickly. "What a surprise. To what do we owe the pleasure?" "I am here in response to a formal complaint filed by Mr. Galloway," she said, her tone all business as she took a seat and opened a notepad. "I am here to observe this care review." Brenda shot me a look of pure betrayal, her eyes asking, "What have you done?" I kept my expression neutral, avoiding her gaze. The trap was now set, and the doors were locked. Mr. Davies, ever the smooth operator, launched the meeting. He began with a glowing overview of Bayshore Gardens, speaking of their holistic approach to elder care and their commitment to dignity and compassion. He then turned the floor over to Nurse Ratcliffe for a specific update on Eleanor. She spoke in a flat, clinical monotone, rattling off readings from my wife's chart. "Mrs. Galloway's vitals are stable," she stated. "Her nutrition intake is excellent. Skin integrity is good. She is responding well to the care plan." It was a portrait of perfect, textbook care, a complete and utter fiction. When she finished, Mr. Davies turned to me, his expression radiating benevolent authority. "So, George," he said gently, "I understand you have had some concerns. Why do you not tell us what is on your mind so we can clear this up?" This was my cue. I took a deep breath, letting my voice sound hesitant and emotional. "It is the bruises," I started, looking not at the staff, but at my daughter. "And she seems so frightened all the time. Her water is always out of reach. I just have this feeling that she is not being looked after properly when I am not here." Before the director could respond with another platitude, Brenda jumped in, just as I knew she would. "Dad, we have talked about this," she said, her voice laced with a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. "Nurse Ratcliffe explained that seniors bruise easily. It is a known medical fact. And you and I both know Mom has been depressed since the stroke. We cannot confuse her sadness with being frightened." She turned to the director and the nurse, offering an apologetic smile. "I am so sorry," she said. "My father is under a tremendous amount of stress. He has been a wonderful, devoted husband, but his grief is making him see things that are not there. I have complete confidence in the care you are providing." She had performed her role perfectly. She had, in front of a state official, acted as their star character witness. She had validated their expertise and invalidated my concerns. The foundation for their comfortable reality was now firmly in place, ready for me to demolish it. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, and I turned to Mr. Davies. "You are right," I said quietly. "My daughter is right. I am just an emotional old man. I am not an expert. My feelings are not evidence." I reached down and opened my briefcase, pulling out my laptop. So I decided to get some evidence. I placed the laptop on the table and connected the HDMI cable to the large television on the wall. The screen flickered to life, showing my simple desktop background. Mr. Davies and Nurse Ratcliffe exchanged a confused look. Brenda leaned forward, a frown creasing her brow. "Dad, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I am showing you what I see," I replied, my voice now devoid of any weakness. I double-clicked a single video file on the screen. The quiet, sterile conference room was suddenly filled with the sounds of room 2B. The first clip appeared on the giant screen. Nurse Ratcliffe, her face a mask of irritation, throwing a blanket roughly over my wife, making her flinch. The date and timestamp were displayed in the bottom corner of the screen in stark white letters. The plan was in motion. The show had begun. The image on the 60-inch television was crystal clear. The conference room, which seconds before had been filled with the sounds of corporate platitudes, was now deathly silent, save for the audio from my laptop. Nurse Ratcliffe's face, projected larger than life on the screen, was twisted in a sneer of casual cruelty that she never showed in public. She let out an audible, irritated sigh as she dealt with Eleanor's blanket. In the reflection of the room's window on screen, you could just make out the digital clock on the nightstand, the source of the damning footage. Nurse Ratcliffe's eyes darted from the screen to me, her professional composure shattering like glass. Her face went from pale to a deep, mottled red. Mr. Davies shot up from his chair. "What is this? What have you done?" He sputtered, his charming facade melting away to reveal a panicked, cornered bureaucrat. This is an outrageous invasion of privacy. This is illegal. Is it as illegal as falsifying medical records? I asked, my voice as cold and hard as polished granite. I did not even look at him. I clicked to the next clip. The scene shifted. It was now late at night in Eleanor's room. The orderly I had seen before appeared on screen. He stood in the doorway, scribbled something on the chart, and then immediately left, never once approaching my wife's bed. On the screen, I superimposed the text from the facility's own care guidelines, which I had downloaded from their website. Patients with mobility restrictions must be repositioned every 2 hours to prevent pressure ulcers. The timestamp on the video showed he had signed off on a 4A repositioning at 2:17 Miss Sanchez, the ombudsman, was writing furiously in her notepad, her expression grim and focused. My daughter, Brenda, was staring at the screen, her mouth slightly agape, a look of profound confusion on her face. She was still processing, her brain trying to reconcile the images on the screen with the trusted professional sitting next to her. The climax was a slow, agonizing burn, and I was in complete control. I was not shouting or accusing. I was simply presenting data. The next clip showed the aide dropping Eleanor's medication, looking around furtively, and then giving it to her. Brenda let out a small, horrified gasp. The next clip showed Eleanor's call alert chiming softly, repeatedly, while 2 aides stood just outside her door, laughing and scrolling on their phones. I let that clip play for a full 2 minutes, the persistent, unanswered chime filling the tense silence of the room, a sound of pure, abject neglect. Each clip was a nail I was methodically hammering into the coffin of their careers. The final and most devastating piece of evidence was the one I had saved for last. The video showed Nurse Ratcliffe and another aide handling Eleanor roughly during a morning change. Eleanor's pained gasp was shockingly loud in the quiet room. And then Nurse Ratcliffe's voice, clear as a bell, filled the space. "Oh, stop being such a baby. It is not like you can feel it anyway." In that moment, Brenda broke. A raw, guttural sob escaped her lips. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. The sound was one of complete and total devastation. It was the sound of a daughter realizing, in the most brutal way imaginable, that she had not just been wrong, she had been a willing accomplice to her mother's suffering. She had not been protecting her mother, she had been protecting the abusers. The carefully constructed wall of denial she had built, with its foundations of trusting the experts, and Dad is just overreacting, had been leveled in an instant. Nurse Ratcliffe was now ashen, staring at her own monstrous image on the screen as if it were a stranger. Mr. Davies was stammering, trying to interrupt, but Ms. Sanchez held up a hand, silencing him. "Let it play, Mr. Davies," she said, her voice carrying a new, steely authority. When the 15-minute video finally ended, I clicked the laptop off, and the screen went black. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, broken only by Brenda's ragged sobs. I looked directly at Mr. Davies and Nurse Ratcliffe. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw, undisguised terror of people who had been caught. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, could not even look at me. She was trapped in the wreckage of her own terrible judgment. The victory was definitive. It was not in a shouted confrontation, but in the cold, undeniable, video-documented truth being laid bare in front of everyone. There were no excuses left, no platitudes, no corporate spin that could cover this. I had not just proven neglect. I had proven a culture of cruelty, and I had forced my daughter to be the star witness at the trial she never knew was happening. The polished image of Bayshore Gardens was shattered, and all that was left was the ugly, brutal reality. That is how I got my so-sweet revenge. The 15 minutes of video evidence did more damage to Bayshore Gardens than 1,000 angry phone calls ever could have. In the suffocating silence of that conference room, the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Mr. Davies, stripped of his corporate charm, began to stammer about unauthorized recordings and facility policy, but Ms. Sanchez cut him off sharply. Facility policy does not supersede state and federal laws regarding elder abuse and neglect. Mr. Davies, she said, her voice like ice, I have seen enough. You will provide my office with all staff schedules, patient charts, and incident reports for this wing for the past 6 months. A team of investigators will be on site tomorrow morning. The life after that meeting was a cascade of controlled consequences. Nurse Ratcliffe and the 2 aides from the most damning clips were fired before I even left the building that day. Mr. Davies tried to save his own skin by portraying them as a few bad apples, but the evidence of falsified charts and systemic, unanswered call alerts pointed to a deeper rot. The state investigation, bolstered by my pristine video evidence, was swift and brutal. Bayshore Gardens was hit with a series of fines so massive they made local news. They were cited for dozens of violations, ranging from medical negligence to failure to protect residents from abuse. Their 5-star rating, the one Brenda had been so proud of, was revoked, and they were placed under strict state supervision for the foreseeable future. The public apology they were forced to issue was a hollow, legalistic document, but seeing their prestigious name dragged through the mud was a deeply satisfying piece of justice. My immediate priority, however, was Eleanor. I moved her out of Bayshore Gardens the very next day. I found a smaller, family-run facility on the other side of town. It did not have manicured lawns or a fancy lobby, but it had a warmth and a genuine sense of compassion that Bayshore Gardens had always lacked. The staff learned Eleanor's name, not just her room number. They spoke to her with kindness, even when they thought no one was watching. Within a few weeks, the change in her was remarkable. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a calm acceptance. She started responding more to my readings, a small squeeze of my hand, a flicker of a smile. She was safe, and that was the only victory that truly mattered. The most complex resolution was with my daughter. Brenda was shattered. For days after the meeting, she was unreachable, lost in a storm of guilt and shame. When she finally came to my condo, she looked like a ghost. She sat at my kitchen table and cried for an hour, apologizing over and over. I did not listen, she sobbed. I did not want to see it. It was easier to believe you were wrong than to believe Mom was in pain. I failed you both. It was a raw and painful confession. My anger towards her had been a shield, but seeing her so utterly broken, I knew that anger would serve no purpose. She was not a monster. She was a daughter who had made a terrible mistake, blinded by her own stress and a desperate need to believe in a simple solution. The revenge I had sought was against the facility, not her. The healing process between us was slow and fragile. It was not about forgiveness, not at first. It was about her taking responsibility. She showed up. She came with me to visit Eleanor every single day at the new facility. She did not offer excuses or try to move on too quickly. She sat with her mother, brushed her hair, and spoke to her with a tenderness I had not seen since she was a little girl. She was present in a way she had not been for years. She was rebuilding the trust she had broken, not with words, but with quiet, consistent action. One afternoon, about a month later, we were sitting with Eleanor in the sunny garden of her new home. Brenda was reading from one of Eleanor's favorite poetry books. When she finished the poem, she looked up at me, her eyes clear for the first time in a long while. "Thank you, Dad," she said softly. "Thank you for not giving up. You saved her." In that moment, I knew we would be okay. My revenge was not born from a desire to punish my daughter, but from a desperate need to protect my wife. The fallout for Brenda was a painful but necessary consequence of her choices. My victory was not in her tears in that conference room, but here, in the quiet peace of this garden, with my wife safe and my daughter finally, truly seeing the truth. The digital clock now sits on my desk at home, its memory card empty. It is a quiet reminder that sometimes the greatest act of love is to seek the truth, no matter how ugly it is, and to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment telling me what part of the story you liked most.